Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at the human element of the extractive sector. It's this fascinating space where the daily, gritty physical realities of a mine site directly collide with the corporate bottom line. We usually think of mining just in terms of geology, heavy machinery, or commodity prices. But an industry built on extracting raw materials, it's fundamentally dependent on the actual people doing the extracting. Just to set the stakes right out of the gate, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, explicitly recognizes that mining operations involve inherently hazardous and physically demanding working conditions. We're definitely not talking about office jobs here. The source material points out that the metals and mining industry has relatively high fatality rates compared to other sectors. The physical risks are very real, they're ever-present, and they require absolutely relentless management. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit 1. A hazardous industry, 2. Measuring health and safety, 3. The role of labor unions, 4. Tracking strikes and lockouts, and finally, 5. Safety, strikes, and profitability. Let's jump right in. Section 1. A hazardous industry, understanding the risks. Let's start right at the root of the problem and look at the specific occupational hazards that make this industry so uniquely dangerous for the workforce on the ground. Fatalities and injuries out there stem from a whole bunch of constant threats on site. According to the SASB standard, these range from massive powered haulage equipment, and just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, some of these dump trucks are literally 3 stories tall, to the complex operation of heavy machinery, and then, of course, there's the environment itself, right? Mine integrity and the structural risks of deep tunnels or massive open pits. A failure in literally any of these areas can be totally catastrophic. Because those risks are so incredibly high, the SASB framework steps in to ensure strict accountability. It actually requires companies to rigorously track and report on these human realities directly to investors. It bridges the gap between what's happening deep underground and what gets reported in annual financial disclosures, making workforce safety a highly visible metric. Moving along to Section 2, Measuring Health and Safety, the SASB metrics. Now, you might be wondering, how do you actually quantify the shield protecting these workers and measure a safety culture on a global scale? Well, you do it through standardized data. The SASB standards lay out precise, quantitative metrics that mining companies simply have to disclose. This isn't about vague, feel-good promises of a safe workplace. This is about hard numbers that prove to the market that a company is actively and successfully managing its workforce's health and safety. These 4 pillars form the absolute core of safety reporting under this standard. Companies have to track the all-incidence rate of injuries, the tragic but vital fatality rate, the near-miss frequency rate, and the average hours of health, safety, and emergency response training provided to the workforce. Put them all together and they create a comprehensive picture of operational safety. Now, the really crucial point here is how these rates are calculated, so investors can actually compare different companies fairly. Incident rates are standardized against a baseline of 200,000 hours. It's actually a brilliant approach because this specific number represents exactly 100 full-time employees working a standard 40-hour workweek for 50 weeks a year. It completely levels the playing field, so it doesn't matter if a company has 500 employees or 50,000. And this brilliantly illustrates how the standard forces companies to be totally transparent about their entire workforce. You have to track these rates not just for the direct employees sitting on the company payroll, but also for contract employees. In a lot of other industries, contract workers are basically just hidden in the data. But in mining, if you supervise them on site, you are strictly accountable for their safety on the record. I also want to highlight the requirement to track a near miss. This is so vital because it acts as a leading indicator. A near miss basically shows us where the safety system almost failed before it actually costs lives or capital. Reporting on near misses proves that a company has a proactive safety culture, one that actually learns from mistakes before they turn into real disasters. All right, Section 3, the role of labor unions, collective bargaining. Let's see how this all builds into the broader context of labor rights. Because safety doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It's often fiercely negotiated. The standards note that in a lot of areas where mining happens, worker rights can sometimes be inadequately protected by local governments. Because of that, companies have to report the percentage of their active workforce organized under collective agreements. These unions are just absolutely critical in representing workers' interests and negotiating both fair wages and those vital safe working conditions we were just talking about. Which brings us to Section 4, tracking strikes and lockouts, when negotiations break down. What happens when the human element and the corporate element fundamentally clash over these conditions? What happens when negotiations just flat out fail? Well, the standard demands transparency here too. The SASB standard neutrally defines the employee's side of a labor dispute as a strike. Interestingly, it treats this not as a political event, but purely as a critical operational metric. When workers stop production to express a grievance or enforce a demand, it immediately and directly impacts the efficiency and output of the entire mine.
But if you immediately flip the coin, we see the employer's mechanism, the lockout. This is a temporary denial of employment to enforce terms upon the workers. Just like a strike, a lockout is strictly monitored and has to be reported as a work stoppage. Both of these represent a severe breakdown in labor relations.
Now, they don't track every minor disagreement. To trigger mandatory reporting for a major work stoppage, the event has to meet a specific threshold. It must involve at least 1,000 workers, and it has to last for one full shift or longer. To put that into perspective, that's like an entire small town suddenly halting operations. When a stoppage hits this scale, it's a massive, undeniable operational hurdle.
Okay, Section 5, safety, strikes, and profitability, the bottom line. This brings us to the consequence phase of our explainer, where we connect these human realities directly to the financial ledger. How exactly do safety and labor rights translate to the boardroom? First, we look at the immediate impact of work stoppages. Companies must calculate total days idle. You do this simply by multiplying the number of workers involved by the number of days the stoppage lasted. This gives investors a brutally clear, quantifiable picture of lost productivity. A 10-day strike with 1,000 workers, that equals 10,000 days idle. That is a staggering amount of unmined metal. So we really have to ask ourselves, what is the ultimate financial fallout when a mining entity fails to manage its workforce effectively? What actually happens to the bottom line when safety is ignored and workers are forced to strike? Well, the source material is crystal clear on this outcome. Ignoring worker rights or compromising on their safety directly results in significant lost revenue from halted production. But beyond just the immediate cash flow hit, it also causes severe reputational damage. And that makes it a whole lot harder for the company to secure future permits or attract necessary investment. Ultimately, persistent labor disputes and poor health and safety records lead to a cascade of financial consequences. We're talking about strict fines and penalties, vastly increased regulatory compliance costs due to closer government oversight, immense operational downtime, and ultimately crippled long-term profitability for the mine itself. It's a massive domino effect. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider this crucial point. An industry entirely built on extracting the Earth's raw materials is ultimately completely dependent on the safety, the health, and the fair treatment of its human capital. If the people can't work safely, the resources just stay in the ground. So what does that mean for how we evaluate the true worth of a mining operation? Something to think about as you review the data. Thanks for joining us.